All right, take it away, Katie.
Okay, excellent. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We're really glad that you're here. Today's town hall is hosted and produced by Halloran Consulting Group. If you can go to the next slide, Maria. Thank you. So Halloran is a life science strategy, regulatory, quality, and clinical consulting firm. We provide tailored expertise to our biotech, pharma, and med device clients across all stages of development. Really, we start with clients who are at company formation stages and early development, all the way through product approval and commercialization. And we serve our clients through strategic advisement, delivery, and execution on their assets and portfolios, and also for their organizations as they're evolving through development and company stages. As for these town halls, we have been hosting these for a couple of years now. We actually started during COVID. Some of you have been with us since then, so thanks for continuing to be part of these important discussions. And our intention is really to share important industry knowledge across our ecosystem of clients, partners, and other friends throughout the industry, really hoping that you can all apply the knowledge to your own organizations. Maria, if you can move to the next slide. Thank you. So again, these events are really about having community conversations across our ecosystem, and they're really conversations that matter to all of us. So today we have an incredible lineup to talk about a very important topic, which is the Inflation Reduction Act. We'll start with some basics, and then we'll talk further about how the IRA is impacting product development programs. So let's get to introductions and then start the discussion. So I'm Katie McCarthy. I'll be serving as the moderator of this discussion today. I've been in the industry for, over 25 years now across academic, biotech sponsor, and consulting settings. And over the past year or so, I have been part of so many conversations with clients and other contacts in the industry about the Inflation Reduction Act. And I've seen so many companies that still don't really know what the IRA is all about or how they and their programs and their companies may be impacted. And so I wanted to bring this discussion to our town hall forum so that we can all learn together and be really well informed as we all go about our goals every day to improve human health. So as I mentioned, we have an incredible panel here today. So welcome panelists, and thank you again for being here with us. I'd love to have you all introduce yourselves and talk about why this topic is so important to you. I know you're all very passionate about it. So I'd love for you to include a little bit of background in addition to introducing yourselves. And Kendall, why don't we start with you?
Great. Thanks so much, Katie. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Kendall Berlin O'Connell. I'm president and CEO of MassBio. If you're not familiar with MassBio is the life sciences trade organization in Massachusetts. We represent over 1,600 member companies, and our mission is to advance Massachusetts leadership in the life sciences, grow the industry, bring value to the healthcare system, and improve patient lives. The IRA has been a major focus of ours at MassBio, obviously representing the #1 life science ecosystem in the world. We have a big role to play in the impacts on innovation. Particularly, in Massachusetts, we have over 1,000 biotech companies, right? So much of what will be implemented through the IRA will have a direct impact on the novel, innovative research that our member companies are doing here. So we've taken this role very seriously. You'll hear more about it later in the discussion, but we've been working closely with our member companies to hear from them what they're seeing the impact, how they're changing their business model, how they're changing their focus in various areas around innovation. So looking forward to talking more about this.
Thanks, Kendall. Neil, could you introduce yourself next?
Hi, I'm Neil DeSpirito. I'm partner with Brown and Rudnick.
the law firm. And I've been in the pharmaceutical industry since 1990 across many different phases of it. I have been inside the pharmaceutical company, the old Upjohn company, which became Pharmacia, which became Pfizer. I have been with the government as a government attorney. I have been in private practice now, probably almost 20 years. My practice is like Halloran's. We go from the smallest startups to the largest corporations. We've represented all of them. Originally, I was a small molecule lawyer like most people, but over time, we added medical devices. And today, most of my practice is in biopharmaceuticals, biologics, and many of those areas, as well as still maintaining some of the traditional pharmaceuticals. I deal with FDA. At one time, I did a lot of enforcement defense work. In addition, I do a lot of work with HHS, CMS, pricing, and many of the different areas of healthcare supply and distribution that affect all of you out there. And so with that, I will turn it back over to Katie.
Thanks, Neil. Tamar, how about you? Could you introduce yourself next?
Absolutely. Thank you, Katie. I am Tamar Thompson, and I'm the head of Global Corporate Affairs for Alexion Pharmaceuticals. I'm also proudly a board member for Kendall at MassBio. I lead our government affairs efforts for Alexion, which is a rare disease company. I choose to say we're a rare disease leader. And sounds like we've got some background, so if everyone could mute, that'd be great. But our interest and my passion around the IRA is obviously to support our patient community and to make sure that as we are moving forward with the government, that the considerations for the rare disease community, the biotech community, are not lost in the spirit of not only the negotiation, but the spirit of innovation in the future of what we've seen in the rare disease space. We want to make sure we protect that, protect what ODA, the Orphan Drug Act, has created in our space. And so that's my interest in the discussion today, and I'll turn it back over to you, Katie.
Thank you, Tamar. And rounding out our group of panelists, John.
Yeah, well, thrilled to be here today. Tough to follow Kendall and Tamar, but John Stanford, I'm the managing partner of a DC-based consultancy called Prism Group, where we advise everything from venture capital to startups to large corporations on the intersection of business and policy. But I also wear another hat. I'm the executive director of a nonprofit called Incubate, which is sort of the national voice of life science venture capital. So I serve as a conduit between Congress and the administration and the role of early stage capital, many of which are Kendall's members, and eventually fund companies that grow up to play in Tamar's world. So it's quite the ecosystem we get to be a part of.
That's great. Thanks, John. Okay, Maria, let's move to the next slide, please. And we have a little poll for the audience. So there should be 2 questions popping up. Maria, thank you. If you could launch that poll. As you can see, the first one is, do you think the IRA will impact you? A simple yes, no, or maybe. And the second question is, what type of product or products is or are your company developing? And you can either select small molecule, biologic, both or other. This is not, neither of these are trick questions. This is just for the panel and I to really understand the level of knowledge within the group and, you know, the types of products that you're developing. All right.
We're still receiving some answers, Katie, so maybe just give it 30 more seconds.
Okay. Great.
I'll launch the results in just a minute.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay, well, this is good to see. So you can see the results there. Do you think the IRA will impact you? Majority of our participants say yes or maybe, which is great. Kendall, I'm sure you'll talk about it at some point, but I was really struck by some survey data that MassBio did earlier this year, where a very large group of our Massachusetts-based companies did not think they would be impacted by the IRA. So this tells me that as an ecosystem, we are learning about the IRA and starting to understand that more. And in terms of the types of products that companies are developing, I see nice split sort of across small molecules, biologic, and a fair number of companies working on both types of products. So that's great. Thank you all for providing us with that knowledge. So let's start our discussion. So by now, we've all heard of the Inflation Reduction Act, or the IRA. For those of you joining, we're guessing there's probably some varied levels of understanding and experience. So we want to start off with some basics around what the IRA is really seeking to accomplish and the intent of the Inflation Reduction Act. And I'm going to hand it over to Neil to kick us off here.
Thank you, Katie. I think that there's two issues that we have. Just having a little bit of trouble with my computer. Excuse me a second. The Inflation Reduction Act, which started as House Bill, 5376, and mutated through the system, as I like to say, to become Public Law 117-169 on August 16th of 2022. As most bills, it'll have intended consequences, which is the intent of Congress. When we look at the legislative record, when we look at what Congress intended, we see their options and their ideas put into this bill. Unfortunately, every law, good, bad, or indifferent, depending on your point of view, has unintended consequences. And the unintended consequences are what are going to affect most of you. And I think if there's anything, Katie, I think when the bill first came out and you did the MassBio work with Kendall, I think what was happening is people weren't thinking about the unintended consequences. They were thinking, great, we're going to lower insulin prices. We're going to cap Part B and Part D for senior citizens at $2,000. We're going to handle all the things. We're going to reduce inflation by increasing productivity. One of the things that I can remember my economics professor saying many years ago, increase productivity, you can lower inflation. Hence why some technology companies are the big winners in this bill. I also have to say it's 730 pages of exhilarating reading. I read it before I went to bed every night and had a great night's sleep. But in essence, the bill meanders, and it is a consolidation, and everything, including the proverbial kitchen sink, are in there. So let's filter this out and let's talk about there's intended consequences of the bill, which are very good. And most laws, I have to say, have intended consequences which are good. Okay. The unintended consequences, as many organizations like PhRMA, the old Pharmaceutical Manufacturers Association when I was involved with them, and Bio, and many of the others are now talking about the unintended consequences, and they're educating people, and we're lobbying about them. The other thing to always keep in mind is, unlike other countries where they create a rule, and I spent a lot of time in Asia Pacific and Europe as well as the US, where they create a rule and it's a rule, our rules get interpreted. They get interpreted by our agencies, they get interpreted by our courts, and they get challenged. Okay. So the intent of a law, let's take a solid concrete example, may have been to lower drug prices. Okay. But, and John will touch on this later, they did so by penalizing small molecules. Now, that was an unintended consequence. Okay. Now, when they put together the bill, I'm sure nobody thought that they would be disadvantaging small molecules. They thought they would be advantaging Medicare and Medicaid and government spending. And so that's what brings us into the legislation itself. And I think there's some key issues here that are unintended consequences that are going to affect all of you on this call. And that is at one time, when I started in the industry, every company basically had its specialty area. Eli Lilly was insulin, and Upjohn had its, and Squibb, Bristol Myers, they were all separate companies in those days, all had theirs, Merck. And what would happen is at a certain point, the drugs would level off, promotion would be brought down, and you would get a cash cow, as they used to call it, a larger return. And this return went on to fund all the new equipment, all the new R&D, all the research development. A large percentage of that went in there. When we got generic competition in 1984 with Hatch-Waxman, which really wasn't enforced until the mid to later 1990s. Okay, what happened was we lost a lot of that revenue capability. Okay, and as managed care and the advent of the PBM, as you read so much about today, and many of the others, they've taken away a lot of the excess margin from these drugs. So your products go out there, whether drugs or biologics, and they have to produce enough revenue to cover the cost you spent on developing these, as well as the cost you spent on developing these, as well as future costs and funding the future R&D. Okay. The unintended consequence of the bill is by lowering Medicaid and Medicare prices, the negotiation, by impacting the price of pharmaceuticals, this level of revenue is gone. And so all of you out there are having to do more with less. And I think that's where we really have to focus here, is on the unintended consequences. Now, will those be challenged? Sure. There'll be agency challenges. I'm sure we'll be taking CMS and HHS and all the agencies impacted here to court. But, these will be long drawn out battles. And the other thing is, this is why good regulations are necessary, because in promulgating a regulation, there's a very important piece called the comments. So as each agency progresses to create more and more regulations in this area, make sure that you all comment. Make sure that you're active on the Hill. Make sure that Congress knows what your comments are, because that's the only way that we get interpretations of the law and regulation that are going to mitigate the effects of what's going on in the bill.
That's great.
And I think that's where I'm going to leave it there, simply because if we get too much deeper, at 730 pages, we'll be here for days. So Katie, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Thanks, Neil. I know it's hard to say. So tell us about the IRA in 5 minutes, but you did a great job. I think, we all know the legislation was created with the best of intentions, right? But there are some unintended consequences. And as you mentioned, Neil, those unintended consequences are impacting innovation, they're impacting future R&D, they're impacting potential deals, they're impacting all sorts of things. And Kendall, I'd love to turn it over to you now to talk a little bit more about those impacts across the industry at large, and particularly within your membership at MassBio. What are some of the key messages that you want to communicate to the audience today about those impacts?
Great, thank you, Katie. And Neil, what a fantastic overview. Thank you so much.
And that's because I think Katie, Kendall, and everyone on this call, John and Tamara, our job is to advise these companies in strategies to help with this. And so I think understanding the bill goes a long way. I'm sorry, Kendall, I didn't mean to cut it in.
No, that was great. I mean, I could listen to your depth of knowledge in this all day. But I'll talk a little bit about the role that MassBio has played in really, again, Massachusetts. So let's level set a little bit about the Massachusetts ecosystem. You heard me say in my opening that we have over 1,000 biotechs here, right? And we know, right, it costs about $2.6 billion to bring a drug to market. It usually takes over 10 years and 90% of companies fail, right? So we all know this, but it's important that our friends in DC understand this as well, right? This doesn't happen overnight. It's not easy. It's grueling. It's challenging. And so what MassBio really wanted to do was, again, understand directly from our member companies what they felt the impacts were going to be on their pipeline, on their investment activity. And so we surveyed our members, and we also did a number of roundtable meetings so we could have some of that anecdotal information too, because we needed to really take a data-driven approach when we met with CMS, as Neil was alluding to. It's really important that you take that time to comment on the implementation of this, because it's here, it's not going anywhere. But the key is how it's implemented, right? Because it's a dial right now, right? They could turn it up and it could be truly catastrophic. It could be turned down and we all win, or it could be sort of right in the middle, and then we figure out how to navigate around that, and we will, but it will certainly change how we all do business and how patients are impacted. And so basically through our survey, it was clear, right? Across the board, the majority of respondents indicated that they have reconsidered their business strategy. And investors, we included the VC community in this as well. And they are certainly thinking about how they approach investment into biotechs. And we've seen this firsthand, right? This isn't conjecture, we've seen it. Companies like Lilly, Novartis, GSK, Alnylam have all come out and announced that they're moving away from small molecule research, and they've pointed directly to the IRA. And there was a piece, and I think it was February or March in the Boston Business Journal that Peter Kolchinsky did. And he said he's working with all of his portfolio companies to move away from small molecule, focus on large molecule. Okay, so what does this mean? Well, this means canceling early stage pipeline projects, focusing on larger indications, and shifting away from small molecule products. And when you think about Massachusetts, here in Massachusetts, our companies make up 17% of the US drug development pipeline, right? So drugs that come out of Massachusetts headquartered companies, it's probably larger because they have companies doing R&D might have a physical presence here. I'm just talking about headquartered companies. So 17% of the US drug development pipeline and about 7% of the global drug development pipeline. This is big, right? We have a huge role to play here in Massachusetts when you think about innovation. And the top areas of research and development that happen in Massachusetts are oncology and CNS. These are small molecule areas, okay? So a number of the other kind of concerning piece of this, but let's just talk about cancer therapies, cancer treatments, right? Again, small molecule. I think it was pharma, and they did an analysis, and they said that, because the other concerning piece of this is the single indication piece, right? Because particularly in cancer treatments, right? It's initially approved through the FDA, and then they find other indication areas. And I think pharma put this out. They said that more than half, or 61% of cancer treatments received at least one additional indication after their initial FDA approval, okay? So this is, and Tamar will talk about the impacts to the rare disease community, but we're talking, think about the oncology research that's happening here in Massachusetts and the impact that's happening around the globe.
And
So
Kendall, do you want to just explain, take a step back for a second, explain the carve out for a single indication versus multiple indications in rare or oncology settings?
Yeah, and I think, some of my colleagues, particularly in the rare disease, but you get an initial FDA approval, and then research and development continues after that, right? In multiple areas. It happens a lot in pediatric cancer, just cancer generally, right? You find one area that the indication works for, but you continue on that particular drug to apply it to different patient populations. And
Yeah,
here they're decentivizing against this, right? They're not incentivizing that for that continued research and development. So what a company will do is they will look for the largest patient population that they can find to get reimbursement on that. But I know that Tamar will dive deep
Yeah,
into
she'll
this as
take
it
us
relates
through
to rare
that in
disease.
a really nice example. Yeah, fantastic.
So I just want to just say one more thing, and then I'll hand it over to my colleagues. You know, there's been a number of entities that have done some analysis on what impacts will be on new drugs, new therapies. And so let's say the Congressional Budget Office, right, put out there that only a 0.5% reduction, we'll see only a 0.5% reduction in new drugs approved in the first year, and 8% reduction by the third decade of implementation. Okay, the University of Chicago found that the law will result in 135 fewer new drugs approved over the next 15 years. And there's an organization called Vital Transformation. They've done a lot of analysis on this, and they've done a lot of work with bio on this. And so what they did is they ran about 200 drugs through Part B, Part D through this pricing model, this proposed pricing model, right? And so from that analysis, they found that 92 drugs would be impacted in the next 10 years. So this would impact about 41 biopharma companies. And they estimate a reduction in revenue of 40% on these impacted drugs. Think about that, okay? So this means if you're quantifying it, we'll see about between, say, 25 to 50 fewer therapies, right? So if this were in place now, there would be between 25 and 50 fewer therapies available. This is substantive. This is going to have a major
Hugely
impact.
impactful. Yep, absolutely. Okay. Thank you, Kendall. And I know you'll get into sort of the bigger impact and what we can do about this moving forward later in the discussion. But I want to turn to John now, because I know particularly through the Incubate Coalition, you have a lot of really impactful pieces around the small molecule penalty, and you have published your opinion in lots of different places. I heard you speak at Convergence earlier in the year, and I thought you were fabulous, which is why I invited you to join us today, and have since read a ton of information, particularly the Stat News article, where it was a piece titled, "Congress Must Fix the IRA Small Molecule Penalty." Can you just talk a little bit about your perspective and help people here today understand what you mean by the small molecule penalty?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Kendall teed it up very well. We are laser focused at Incubate on this one issue. So in any given year, usually I have to balance 8 to 10 different priorities: FDA reauthorization, things at HHS, crazy ideas in Congress. But this year, post IRA, we decided we were going to just take on one element that we find most concerning out of the Inflation Reduction Act. And I'd start with the old saying that time is money. And I think that's critically important to think about here, because prior to the Inflation Reduction Act, companies and reimbursement policy in the United States didn't have a variable as dedicated to time. It was very drug by drug. So if you had extra time left on the patent, you could put that into your planning. You could think through how you were going to reinvest profits or market a drug. In our industry, quite frankly, time is now going to be the number one factor in what you invest in from our perspective, what entrepreneurs innovate in, and most importantly, and not to be forgotten, what patients will get. And so within the law that Neil laid out, the timelines are set for when the government can install what we consider price controls through a fairly one-sided negotiation process. For biologic products, think the things you get infused with at a hospital or a clinic, need a doctor. Those are going to get 13 years of protection before those price controls can kick in. So on one hand, you got 13 years. For small molecule, they only have 9 years. And the moment we saw that in the law, we grew very concerned, because we want scientists, we want an entrepreneur who really knows this stuff thinking about the best way to bring a possible asset forward for patients. We want Washington so far away from the drug development world that we cannot direct funding towards certain areas. We really want to be able to let science lead here, and this does just the opposite. Now, some of you may be saying, well, gosh, I don't know, 9 years sounds like a long time, and small molecules are just pills, so maybe it makes sense. We've done some digging on the facts, along with some of our great peers like MassBio. You know, pre-IRA, post-Bayh-Dole, the last 4 decades of success in the US, drugs on average recoup investment over 14 to 16 years. So when Tamar is making a really important decision about her pipeline, you know, they have to look at the numbers about what makes economic and rational sense here, as well as what's going to bring value to patients. That 14 to 16 timeline is pretty well understood. Congress decided it's time for a haircut. And if you're a biologic, going from 14 to 13 still is a pretty big haircut. I don't want to dispel the idea that biologics are getting off scot-free. They're not. But 14 to 9 is a gut punch, especially when you consider that 50% of a drug's revenues come in years 9 to 13. And the reason for that is it takes a long time for drug adoption to take place. And we can get into that if there are questions. But we've now created this bifurcated system that if you're developing a small molecule, your economic reward is so much smaller than if you develop a biologic. Well, put yourself then in the investor seat. And Rich, let's remember, VCs aren't just people sitting around on piles of their own money. They're sitting on my retirement account, university endowments, labor unions, pension funds, philanthropies. They have to be economic stewards. And if you were sitting across the table from your financial advisor and said, stock over here pays 13 times, stock over here pays 9 times, I think you should take this one, you'd fire them on the spot. That same rationale is playing out for us. And we're seeing the money move in real time from our investments towards biologics significantly. And the explanation is the Inflation Reduction Act. And so we are doing our darndest. We've got bipartisan support in Congress that this is an issue. We just did a great event with some of the North Carolina delegation. We're going to keep working with the Massachusetts delegation because everyone recognizes this is having real effect right now. And so we're hoping to get 13 years for both small molecule and biologics so that it can be the science that decides where investment and activity goes, not Washington. And with that, I'll turn it over to my much more learned colleagues.
Thanks, John. And I know you have some really fantastic one-pagers on the Incubate Coalition website. So I would encourage everyone to take a look at that. They're really great. They put all of the words that John just shared with us into sort of a graphic in a really user-friendly way. So definitely take a peek. So let's kind of continue that train of thought around the impact on investments and strategic transactions. And Kendall, Tamar, I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you're seeing. I mean, we've to kind of connect all the dots. John, you mentioned that between years 9 and 13, that's where companies are seeing 50% of revenues generated. And Neil, you teed up early on that those revenues generated during those years are also what's really funding additional R&D and partnering and other investments. So what are the practical examples and scenarios that you're seeing, Kendall, Tamar, Neil? Would love to just, sort of quickly have you comment on that point to kind of bring it all together for the audience.
Yeah,
Tamar should kick this one off. Yeah.
Thank you. I'll start and just say I have a few comments to some of the comments that my colleagues have made, and I just want to say thank you all for, John said more learned. I don't think that's true. John, you gave an excellent overview of the real life implications, and Kendall, thank you for teeing off the discussion around the one indication issue. I want to bring up another topic, and Neil brought up something that I think is important for us to address, which is the way pharma used to work versus the way we work today. I, am proudly an Alexion AstraZeneca employee, but spent many years at Bristol Myers Squibb prior to that. And so I very much understand the history around, products that are post-market and how they used to perform in the R&D cycle. But today we have generics, and today we have biosimilars that enter the market that take away from that share. So John said something about doing more with less. I just want you to understand that the less is much less. There's not, it's not a cash cow. I think that was stated somewhere. Those days are long gone for most all of us. And I certainly don't speak for, my colleagues elsewhere, but for most companies, we do have market competition that comes into the place and brings prices down naturally, just through the market competition, which makes this law incredibly challenging. And I will say that I firmly believe that policy has and continues to play an important role globally in encouraging innovation and bringing new treatments to patients. And that one example of positive policy that we are very focused on is the Orphan Drug Act. It is celebrating its 40-year anniversary this year. Without the Orphan Drug Act, we would not be where we are, and certainly many rare disease companies would not. But unfortunately, there are provisions, many of which Kendall has addressed and Neil in his opening remarks, that have pushed back but dare to threaten the positive movement that ODA has brought to the table. And so, I think that it's important for us to talk about how policy can move the needle forward in either a positive or negative way, and where we've seen, more than 500 new treatments developed over time with with the ODA. We're now seeing what John has articulated very well is investors pulling back. That means research gets pulled back. That means all the work that we've done, to treat all of the rare disease patients globally gets pulled back at a time when innovation is just starting to, to move in the rare disease space in particular. And I think, to pull through on Kendall's point, there's a slide that we have on the Alexion side that I'd like to share, if we could bring that up. Kendall mentioned the one indication issue in oncology, and I don't know who's running our slides, but thank you for bringing it up. So here's just an example of what Kendall discussed, but this is on the rare disease side of things. This is my product. This is Solaris. Solaris was, orphan designated treatment. We started that work in 2003 for PNH. And I'll send you the definition of PNH later for those who want the name instead of the acronym. It's quite difficult to pronounce. But we got FDA approval in 2007 for PNH with Solaris. We moved into a second indication, and I should say that Solaris is a C5 platform. It's a platform technology that is useful, we're finding, in many indications, so not very dissimilar to many IO platforms in the oncology space. And so you would see IO products have a very similar trajectory of one drug, a platform biologic with multiple indications. This is where we are with our C5 technology. In 2011, we got approved for atypical AHUS, and then 2017 for GMG, and then now NMOSD. What this means for us at Alexion is that we've been able to expand this therapy to treat more patients with more rare diseases, because we've been able to leverage existing technology and find opportunities for more rare disease patients. Today, 95% of rare disease patients do not have a viable treatment option. We have more than 10,000, well, arguably 7,000 to 10,000 known rare diseases, and 95% of them do not have a viable FDA-approved treatment option. If we were in a situation where IRA was in place, then we would have been potentially selected for Medicare negotiation in 2019. And so this is just a real live example. And obviously Solaris is now going off patent, but this product has been so useful in not one indication, not two, but three or four indications. And we've been able to bring treatments to patients in the rare disease space. And while we're just chipping away at the iceberg, Certainly the example that Kendall gave in oncology is very valid in the rare disease space as well. We can take down the slide. This is just a visual example. But so this is where we believe that policy and unintended consequences not only harm companies, and we certainly understand the need for us to bring down drug pricing across the globe. It's not, a US-centric problem. Affordability post-pandemic lends itself to a lot of challenges for governments and payers. However, to penalize patients and the development opportunity for innovation and next level treatments, we just cannot get on board with that. We cannot get on board with, moving down a path that takes patients back, that gives patients no options for viable treatment, or puts them in the position to be on treatments that are less than less than what they deserve. Patients deserve every opportunity at life to have the best quality of life, and that's firmly footing in where we stand in our position on this issue as well. I'll stop there because I know for time's sake we want to get some additional questions and answers in, but I thought it'd be a great example to show kind of a real live situation and linking to Kendall's example as well.
Thank you, Tamar. I think that example did a great job to sort of pull it all together and help us really understand the impacts. So thank you. Kendall, did you have any comments sort of around the domino effects that you're seeing across the industry? I know you're seeing a lot from your view at MassBio.
Absolutely. And I guess I might answer this in a different way than you're thinking about the question, but I do want domino effects. Let's talk about a little bit, and Neil can probably provide better context, but we're seeing companies react, right? So not just impacts of biotech companies' investment, we've talked a little bit about that, but we're seeing lawsuits being filed, right? And this is, and fundamentally we're in agreement with this, right? Because what we're seeing government do is basically move away from a market-driven approach and implement price controls, right? But our friends in DC are doubling down on this. And so maybe some of you have seen this, but I think it was last Wednesday, there's a proposed new piece of legislation that would expand the drug price negotiation. So they're looking, right, a number of different committees, Ways and Means, let's see, Energy and Commerce, Education and Workforce, all back this, right, to expand the number of drugs that Medicare will negotiate from 20 to 50 by 2029. This is in direct response to the lawsuits, right? We hope that it's a messaging bill, but the message is we're not backing down, we're doubling down on this. Right. And so it is really important when we think about your companies. Now you're hearing this, we've heard from Tamar, we've heard, from other companies, how they're changing the way that they're innovating, and patients will suffer at the end of this. It is imperative that we all speak with our delegation and talk about the impacts on patients. Obviously, it's about the reimbursement piece, but ultimately companies will change how they do business, but patients will suffer. So I just wanted to make sure when we think about domino effects, they're not backing down, right? This is only potentially expanding. And I actually wanted to pose a question to John, because he talked about the work that they're doing in DC to increase the small molecule, period of exclusivity to 13 years. But what happens if we go there and they decide to decrease large molecule? And that's a real concern for us. So I'd love to hear John's perspective. Not that I'm hijacking the question.
No, it's a great one. I love it.
It's and look, we already see, as you noted, proposals even a couple months before that. You heard the president in the State of the Union, and I should stress, there are a lot of pro-patient reforms in the Inflation Reduction Act that Incubate and Prism Group and others worked hard on. Smoothing patient costs throughout the year was a no-brainer for 2 decades that finally we got done. So there are great provisions in this law, but there is a disconnect when you think about this law. And when you saw the State of the Union from the president, how excited he was to talk about bringing down drug prices within the first seconds of taking the microphone. And then 40 minutes later, he brought up the cancer moonshot and a doubling down on an ability to fight cancers, especially brain cancer. There's a reason 40 minutes has to pass between those two statements, because they are fundamentally at odds with one another. And so out of that State of the Union, where the president said, let's go further, we saw Senator Klobuchar propose a 5-and-5 setup, so that, and one of the Democratic staffers said, oh, we'll give you parity. We're going to just bring everybody down. I think, fortunately, it may be too little too late for, certainly too little too late for the Inflation Reduction Act. But we're not the boy who cried wolf as an industry. We are showing companies stepping away from promising trials. I mean, one of the first ones we saw was Alnylam stepping away from a phase 3B trial. You don't step away from phase 3B. You're so far along. So,
and that was in a second indication for an approved product, right?
Yeah, and I don't know. And so, Kendall, we are banking on the fact that the damage that's been already so visible will help keep off. But those voices to pull this down even further are very much out there. It's not like we've achieved some neutral ground. And a lot of this has to do with our very broken payer system.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, because I'm cognizant of time, because I want to make sure that the audience can ask some questions, but I do want to propose one more question to the panel before we turn it over to the audience Q&A. And it's really, I mean, I think you guys have done a fantastic job, and no surprise, teeing up all of the unintended consequences of this piece of legislation or of this law, right? What can we do? What can we do now? All of the participants sitting in the audience are, I would guess, are thinking, wow, this is a big deal. So what can we all do from here?
I think Kendall made a very good point. First of all, working with your associations, MassBio, Pharma, whatever organizations you belong to, challenging laws, finding lawyers that'll challenge the laws that need to be challenged is an important step. And that's expensive. That's, different things. But, when you challenge these laws, an individual large company may find a large benefit to doing it, whereas smaller companies may be better getting together in groups with MassBio and Pharma and all of the other people that are out there. One of the things I am concerned about is, Tamara brings it up, and that is the orphan drugs. Because I think I can remember, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, I had a distant relative who died of ALS. And the family kept saying to me, why aren't they researching, ALS? And the answer was because the way pharmaceutical research worked in those days, and without the orphan drug designations, et cetera, there was no incentive for the companies. It's the same thing we're facing with antibiotics today. There's no incentive because you can't recoup your costs using it as a second or third line treatment. It's got to be a first line treatment. And that means payers have to pay for it up front. Okay. And that gets into a topic John touched on, but that's a topic for a separate day. But, these are the things that that concern me in there, and certainly challenging the law, being present in Congress, being present on the Hill, being present at the agencies, commenting on the regulations. When I was in Asia Pacific, Japan had a system where the first drug in, it got to full price. The second drug in got 3/4 of the price. The third drug, half the price. And then everybody else's entry got 40%. So you had to have some strategy as to how you went into that market. And I think that's what's going to happen here. Just raising your initial WAC price at launch isn't going to be your strategy, because Congress has tied this to price indexes that aren't realistic. They're not your costs. Okay. So, you know, in essence, it's going to be a challenge. And I think what you have to do is you have to challenge this for fairness. That's the whole thing. And Kendall, to your point about bio versus small molecule, you've got to challenge on both sides because you don't want government to say, okay, we'll make everybody equal.
Right.
So
And
how can we challenge? You know, some of our participants are at bigger companies where they have, you know, departments and functions that focus on these activities. Others may be
Government
at
affairs, yes.
very small, yes, exactly. But others are at much smaller companies where they don't have the resources or the funding to really focus. I'm guessing the agencies that, you know, trade organizations like MassBio is a great place to get involved, or other trade organizations in the states wherever you're located. But, you know, how else can people get involved and make an impact?
Well, I
Hey,
mean,
can I
look at John's Incubate organization that he started. I mean, you know, there are grassroots ways of doing this. The other thing is you don't have to challenge the whole system every time. Many times I get a client who has a problem. We challenge the agency or, you know, quietly, and we get the problem resolved. So it doesn't
Sure.
always have to be the huge lawsuit, the big
Sure.
expense. It can be lawyer to lawyer with the agencies and things like that. But I think Kendall probably has a lot of insight on this issue.
Yeah, Kendall?
Absolutely. So, I mean, first and foremost, your trade organizations, whether it's MassBio, whether it's John's organization, nonprofit organization, whether you're in California, right? We're all doing the work. But don't forget, our federal delegation represents you. You are their constituent wherever you're located. Okay, so what I'm doing is we did the data, we were able to aggregate that data. And yes, you probably might not get a meeting with CMS. We got a meeting with CMS on your behalf to make recommendations on implementation based on survey data. But I'm also going to do the roadshow with our federal delegation, just as John was mentioning, right? And taking that data, but creating a narrative that resonates with the delegation in regard to their constituent base and the impacts, the health equity impacts on the patient population that they serve, right? So I do think making sure that when you are reaching out to your delegation, which you should be doing, you're doing it in a way that you're storytelling in a way that resonates with them. And I'll just give you a quick example. During Bio, when the convention was here in Boston, we did a fundraiser for Congresswoman Catherine Clark in partnership with Bio. Excellent fundraiser, raised a lot of money for her. Every question that came in through the Q&A portion of that event was about the IRA and what was she and her colleagues doing around IRA and the impacts on innovation. I'm pretty sure that sent a good message, right? That this is hugely important to the constituents that were in that meeting.
That's great. Thanks, Kendall. John, thoughts about action that people can take?
I won't be duplicative. Get involved. For decades, this was pharma's problem, and everyone around the table let it be pharma's problem. At the state level, it doesn't get better than MassBio. That doesn't fly anymore. We all have to have a seat at the table for advocacy, and I don't care if you're running a 2-person biotech. One of you has to sort of step up and participate. And that gets me to sort of, I'll do a twofer. I see Michael's question in the chat and just say, is this going to affect in vitro diagnostics? I won't get into the details of how it possibly could. $100 billion is being taken out of this sector. It will affect everyone at some point. We may not be able to predict it, but there is no world where the sector looks like it does today in 10 years when $100 billion or $200 billion has disappeared. So we're all going to be impacted. Therefore, we all have to get together, and I'll kick it over to Tamar.
Thank you, John. You took the words right out of my mouth. I wanted to say that this is not a pharma problem. This is not a biotech problem. This is a global challenge. This is a problem for patients. This is a problem, quite frankly, for small businesses at the local level. I mean, there's a ripple effect. You throw, the stone into the river, there are ripples. And so that is a challenge. I just want to make sure that people understand that this is not, a pharma issue and pharma figure it out. This is a community challenge. And I'll close on Kendall's comments and say that this is a health equity challenge as well. I think there are lots of things that are being addressed, and you mentioned the White House. They have a focus on diversity and inclusion and health equity. This also, to me, flies in the face of a lot of the work that they're doing to enhance diversity, inclusion, and health equity. Because while we've made certain drugs more affordable in certain ways, making drugs inaccessible, not having access, and I mentioned the rare disease population. For me, I feel that my patient population, the rare disease community, is the most marginalized community in the healthcare spectrum. It on average takes 7 years for patients to get diagnosed. 50% of those are kids. This is a big problem for the full community of healthcare, not just a pharma bio problem.
Thanks, Tamar. So we have a couple of minutes left. People are welcome to post questions in the chat. They're also welcome to come off mute and ask a question through the Zoom. But we'd love to pause and take your questions now. All right, I'm seeing a lot of activity in the chat, not a lot of questions, but thank you. It sounds like you all found this valuable and that the panelists, and no surprise, did a fantastic job sharing really great insights.
The question we may have missed that Michael asked around noteworthy impacts on in vitro diagnostics. Could anyone answer that question for Michael?
Oh, John touched on it.
You did. Oh, I missed it. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. John touched on it.
Let's make sure we got it.
Yeah, we did. Thank you. Thank you. I'm not sure if anyone else has anything else to add other than what John mentioned. Okay, let's see. Can someone share a link or article? Oh, that's a great idea. Panel, I'm not sure if you saw the question. Can someone share a link or article or talking points about the rare disease angle so I can share with my congressperson?
Yes.
Yeah, we certainly can.
Yes.
I mean, certainly Mass Bio and all those organizations will have that. John is active on that. Tamar. And I have to say, your lawyers generally put out alerts and analyses on a regular basis. Part of our job is to get you in front, to get you those meetings with the agencies. And the other part is to keep you informed, of what is going on. So look to a lot of your law firms, and there are some links and people who discuss rare diseases from a neutral standpoint.
Yeah.
I'd
John,
be happy to share those with you if you reach out afterwards.
Yeah, and Neil, if I can just be shameless and give a plug to NORD and Every Life here. They are the patient advocacy organizations that is doing the yeoman's work in DC on this topic. And so if you just, from a neutral, standpoint, if you visit NORD's website, if you visit Every Life's website, they both have much of the information that I've discussed today, including the definition of rare and the patient populations on their websites. And we're happy to share even more information as needed as well. We can get that to the Halloran team.
Excellent. And we can go ahead and share all of those links in follow-up to this call today. So that's great. Okay, I think we're at time, so we're going to have to wrap it up, but we really, really appreciate everyone's participation. Tamar, John, Kendall, Neil, thank you so much. As expected, you guys were fantastic and have, I know, so much more to share. So maybe we can do a follow-up in the coming months.
Thank you for having us, Katie.
Thank you for having me.
Having us.
All right, talk to you all soon. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.